Penguin Random House Audio presents A Terribly Serious Adventure, Philosophy and War at Oxford, 1900 to 1960, by Nikhil Krishnan. Read for you by Kieran Hodgson.
Dramatis Personae. Principal Characters. R.G. Collingwood, 1889 to 1943. English philosopher, historian, and archaeologist who made serious contributions to all three disciplines. His philosophical work concerned questions in all branches of philosophy, but his work on the philosophy of history was especially influential. Major works: The Principles of Art, 1938, An Autobiography, 1939, The Idea of History, 1946. Gilbert Ryle, 1900 to 1976. Pioneering philosopher of mind and a foundational figure in the tradition of ordinary language philosophy. Waynflete Professor of Metaphysics at the University of Oxford and editor of Mind, an influential philosophical journal. Major works: Systematically Misleading Expressions, 1932, The Concept of Mind, 1949. Isaiah Berlin, 1909 to 1997. Émigré from the Russian Empire after the Bolshevik Revolution. Historian of ideas, liberal and anti-communist political thinker. Major works: Karl Marx, His Life and Environment, 1939, The Hedgehog and the Fox, 1953, Two Concepts of Liberty, 1958. A.J. Ayer, 1910 to 1989. Influential figure in the reception of Austrian logical positivism in the English-speaking world. Public intellectual, secularist, liberal, and rationalist. Major works: Language, Truth and Logic, 1936, The Problem of Knowledge, 1956. J. L. Austin, 1911 to 1960. Pioneering figure of ordinary language philosophy, aiming to dissolve philosophical problems by showing them to emerge out of misunderstandings of language, as well as the theory of speech acts. Major works: Other Minds, 1946, Sense and Sensibilia, 1962, How to Do Things with Words, 1962. G.E.M. Elizabeth Anscombe, 1919 to 2001. Student of Ludwig Wittgenstein at Cambridge. Later, his literary executor and the English translator of his later works, including the Philosophical Investigations. A convert to Roman Catholicism. Major works: Intention, 1957, Modern Moral Philosophy, 1958. R.M. Hare, 1919 to 2002. Moral philosopher associated with a prescriptivist theory of morals, according to which moral language is understood not as describing the world, but as prescribing courses of action. Major works: The Language of Morals, 1952, Freedom and Reason, 1963, Moral Thinking, 1981. Iris Murdoch, 1919 to 99. Moral philosopher and novelist best known for her work on moral psychology and an approach to ethics inspired by Plato. Major works: Sartre, Romantic Rationalist, 1953, The Sovereignty of Good, 1970, Metaphysics as a Guide to Morals, 1992. Mary Midgley, 1919 to 2018. Philosopher and public intellectual best known for her work at the intersection of zoology and moral philosophy. Major works: Beast and Man, 1978, Wickedness, 1984. Peter Strawson, 1919 to 2006. Philosopher of logic and language who did pioneering work in reviving metaphysics and on the theoretical philosophy of Immanuel Kant. Major works: Individuals, an essay in descriptive metaphysics, 1959, Freedom and Resentment, 1960, The Bounds of Sense, 1966. Philippa Foot, 1920 to 2010. Moral philosopher best known for her contribution to the revival of Aristotelian approaches to ethics and her original work in applied ethics. Major works: Moral Arguments, 1958, Morality as a System of Hypothetical Imperatives, 1972. Natural Goodness, 2001. Bernard Williams, 1929 to 2003. Moral philosopher best known for his skeptical views about the authority of morality, and for his conception of philosophy as a humanistic discipline whose concerns are continuous with those of history and literature. Major works: A Critique of Utilitarianism, 1973, Moral Luck, 1981, Ethics and the Limits of Philosophy, 1985. 0. Giddiness. One may as well begin with Socrates. And with Socrates, it always begins with a boy and a question. This boy is 16. He likes to wrestle, and he likes geometry. He will die one of the greatest mathematicians of the age. He is called Theaetetus, and he gives his name to a dialogue by Plato about an episode, very possibly historical, when he, an adolescent mathematical prodigy, meets a Socrates who is shortly to be charged with heinous crimes, impiety, corrupting youth, and sentenced to death. Theaetetus is not beautiful, but he is bright, even-tempered, and intellectually eager, which makes him just Socrates' type. Socrates was a soul man. In his usual way, he asks the boy, "What is knowledge?" Theaetetus would like to play, but he doesn't know how. "I assure you, Socrates, that I have often tried to think this out when I have heard reports of the questions you ask, but I can never persuade myself that anything I say will really do, and yet again, you know, I can't even stop worrying about it." Sometimes, he admits, when I'm looking at them, Socrates' questions, I begin to feel quite giddy. "I dare say you do, my dear boy," says Socrates, "for this is an experience which is characteristic of a philosopher, this wondering. This is where philosophy begins and nowhere else." Where philosophy begins, in wonder, giddiness, and sleepless nights. Reading a book without a preface, the logician Michael Dummett, born 1925, once wrote, is like arriving at someone's house for dinner and being conducted straight into the dining room. No one is required to read it, but a reader who wants to be personally introduced has the right to be. Even an impersonal history needs a personal note to set off the rest. Even Oxford's short, packed terms have room for a North Week, when introductions are made and the quaint ways of a strange town explained to the newcomer. This book is a history of philosophy at Oxford in the mid-20th century. Who would want to write the story of such a thing, and why? The question might be asked with either curiosity or disdain. Disdain from those who come to the subject armed with strong prejudices, curiosity from those persuaded the history needs to be written, but surprised to see it written by someone with so exotic a name. I arrived in Oxford in 2007 on a scholarship that paid for me to do a second undergraduate degree. Having completed one already, in economics, a moderately useful subject for which I had little affection, I was resolved not to waste a chance to study something I might recklessly enjoy. But at that stage, philosophy was a subject about which my ideas were vague and largely romantic. I had grown up in India, a country with a long and sophisticated philosophical tradition, honoured chiefly today as a piece of inert heritage. One was glad to know it was there. Few people were particularly inclined to study it. Still less was there any inclination to treat it as a going concern. Few universities offered it as an option, and those that did taught it as history, as if it were part of the essence of the subject that a philosopher must be not only wise, but dead. What I associated with the word philosophy was a particular quality. Call it depth. Philosophy was, as the etymology of the Sanskrit word for it suggests, vision. The philosopher a sort of seer or seer. Abstraction was the mark of philosophy, and outlandishness the sign of a philosophical claim worth taking seriously. The more radical its rejection of common sense, the better. I was drawn, before I had read very much of it, to a view of philosophy as mystery, as poetry, as paradox. The idea that philosophy was about solving problems, as in, say, trigonometry, would have struck me then as both vulgar and silly. My under...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?